What's up, fuckers? I am reading Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. If anyone gets on me about reading, year 5, instead of reading year 1, I am too broke and way too lazy to go get the first book from the library, so, uh, you're gonna have to just suffer with me. Um, so yeah. There are, let's see, 38 chapters in this book, 845 pages. It's going to take me a while to read this. But let's just start. Alright, chapter 1, Dudley Demented. The hottest day of the summer so far was drawing to a close, and a drowsy silence lay over the large, square houses of Privet Drive. Cars that were usually gleaming stood dusty in the drives, and lawns that were once emerald green lay parched and yellowing. The use of hose pipes had been banned due to the drought. Deprived of their usual car washing and lawn mowing pursuits, the inhabitants of Privet Drive had retreated into the shade of their cool houses, windows thrown wide in the hope of tempting in a non-existent breeze. The only person left outdoors was a teenage boy who was lying flat on his back in a flower bed outside of number 4. He was skinny, black-haired, bespectacled boy who had the pinched, slightly unhealthy look of someone who had grown a lot in a short space of time. His jeans were torn and dirty, his t-shirt baggy and faded, and the soles of his trainers were peeling away from the uppers. Harry Potter's appearance did not endear him to the neighbors, who were the sort of people who thought scruffiness ought to be punishable by law. But as he had hidden himself behind a large hydrangea bush this evening, he was quite invisible to passerby. In fact, the only way he would be spotted was if Uncle Vernon or Aunt Petunia stuck their heads out of the living room window and looked straight down into the flower bed below. On the whole, Harry thought he was to be congratulated on his idea of hiding here. He was not, perhaps, very comfortable lying on the hot, cold. Fuck. He was not, perhaps, very comfortable lying on the hot, hard earth. But on the other hand, nobody was glaring at him, grinding the teeth so loudly that he could not hear the news, or shooting nasty questions at him, as had happened every time he had tried sitting down in the living room and watching television with his aunt and uncle. Almost as though his thought had fluttered through the open window, Vernon Dursley, Harry's uncle, suddenly spoke, glad to see the boy stop trying to butt in. "Where is he, anyways?" "I don't know," said Aunt Petunia unconcernedly. "Not in the house." Uncle Vernon grunted. "Watching the news," he said scathingly. "I'd like to know what he's really up to. As if a normal boy cares what's on the news. Dudley hasn't gotten a clue what's going on. Doubt he knows who the Prime Minister is. Anyways, it's not as if there'd be anything about his lot on our news." "Vernon, shush," said Aunt Petunia. "The window's open." "Oh, yes. Sorry, dear." The Dursleys fell silent. Harry listened to a jingle about fruit and bran cereal, while he watched Mrs. Fig, a batty cat-living old lady from nearby Wisteria Walk, amble slowly by. She was frowning and muttering to herself. Harry was very pleased that he was concealed behind the bush. Mrs. Fig had recently taken to asking him around for tea whenever she met him in the street. She had rounded the corner and vanished from view before Uncle Vernon's voice floated out of the window again. "Daughter's out for tea?" At the Poliskis," said Aunt Petunia fondly. "He's got so many little friends. He's so popular." Harry suppressed a snort with difficulty. The Dursleys really were astonishingly stupid about the son Dudley. They had swallowed all of his dim-witted lies about having tea with a different member of his gang every night of the summer holiday. Harry knew perfectly well that Dudley had not been to tea anywhere. He and his gang had spent every evening vandalizing the play park, smoking on street corners, and throwing stones at passing cars and children. Harry had seen them at it during his evening walks around Little Wingham. He had spent most of the holidays wandering the streets, scavenging newspapers from bins along the way. The opening notes of the music that heralded the 7 o'clock news reached Harry's ears, and his stomach turned over. Perhaps tonight, after a month of waiting, would be the night. Record numbers of stranded holiday makers fill airports as the Spanish baggage handlers' strike reaches its second week. Give him a lifelong siesta, I would, snarled Uncle Vernon over the end of the newsreader's sentence. But no matter. Outside in the flower bed, Harry's stomach seemed to unclench. If anything had happened, it would surely have been the first item on the news. Death and destruction were more important than stranded holiday makers. Oh, yeah. So, The Order of the Phoenix is the book that follows directly after the rise of Voldemort, as far as I know. It's right after. This is year 5, so year 4 was when they had a tournament, I believe, and Voldemort was raised from the dead. So Dumbledore, I'm pretty sure, is kind of ignoring Harry at this point, and Harry kind of expects the Dark Lord to go around just fucking up everything. And yeah, okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I had to catch up here for a second. It's been a long time since I've read this book. Okay. He let out a long, slow breath and stared up at the brilliant blue sky. Every day the summer had been the same. The tension, the expectation, the temporary relief, and then mounting tension again. And always, growing more insistent all the time, the question of why nothing had happened yet. He kept listening, just in case there was some small clue, not recognized for what it was by the Muggles. An unexplained disappearance, perhaps, or some strange accident. But the baggage handler's strike was followed on the news by the drought in the southeast. I hope he's listening next door, bellowed Uncle Vernon, with his sprinklers on at 3 a.m. Then a helicopter that had almost crashed in a field in Surrey. Then a famous actress's divorce from her famous husband. As if we're interested in the sordid affairs, sniffed Aunt Petunia, who had followed the case obsessively in every magazine she could lay her bony hands on. Harry closed his eyes against the now blazing evening sky as the newsreader said, and finally, Bungie the... I'm sorry, what is this? Bungie the Budgie has found a novel way of keeping cool this summer. Bungie, who lives in the Five Feathers in Barnsley, has learned to water ski. Mary Dawkins? What kind of... Imagine your last name is Dawkins. You're like, oh, have you talked to the new Dork in town? The new Dork? Yeah, Mary Dawkins. That's so fucking stupid. Alright, okay, I'm sorry. Mary Dawkins went to find out more. Harry opened his eyes again. If they had reached water skiing Budagaras, then there was nothing else worth hearing. He rolled cautiously onto his front and raised himself onto his knees and elbows, preparing to crawl out from under the window. He had moved about 2 inches when several things happened in very quick succession. A loud echoing crack broke through the sleepy silence like a gunshot. A cat streaked out from under a parked car and flew out of sight. A shriek, a bellowed oath, and the sound of breaking china came from the Dursleys' living room. As though Harry had been waiting for the signal, he jumped to his feet at the same time, pulling from the waistband of his jeans a thin wooden wand, as if he were unsheathing a sword. But before he could draw himself up to his full height, the top of his head collided with the Dursleys' open window, and the resultant crash made Aunt Petunia scream even louder. Harry felt as if his head had been split in two. Eyes streaming, he swayed, trying to focus on the street and spot the source of the noise, but he had barely staggered upright again when 2 large purple hands reached through the open window and tightly closed around his throat. "Put it away!" Uncle Vernon snarled into Harry's ear. "Now, before anyone sees." "Get off me!" Harry gasped. For a few seconds they struggled, Harry pulling at his uncle's sausage-like fingers with his left hand, his right maintaining a firm grip on his raised wand. Then, as a pain in the top of Harry's head gave a particularly nasty throb, Uncle Vernon yelped and released Harry as though he had received an electric shock. By some invisible force seemed to have surged through his nephew, making him impossible to hold. Panting, Harry fell forward over the hydrangea bush, straightened up and stared around. There was no sign of what had caused the loud croaking noise, but there were several faces peering through the various nearby windows. Harry stuffed his wand hastily back into his jeans and tried to look innocent. "Lovely evening," shouted Uncle Vernon, waiting at Mrs. Number 7, who was glaring at her from behind her net curtains. Did you hear that car backfire just now? Gave Aunt Petunia and me quite a turn." He continued to grin in a horrible, maniac way, until all the curious neighbours had disappeared from the various windows. Then the grin became a grimace of rage, as he beckoned Harry back toward him. Harry moved a few steps closer, taking care to stop just short of the point at which Uncle Vernon's outstretched hands could resume the strangling. "What the devil do you mean by it, boy?" asked Uncle Vernon in a croaky voice that trembled with fury. "What do I mean by what?" said Harry coldly. He kept looking left and right up the street, hoping to see the person who had made the cracking noise, making a racket like a starting pistol right outside our... "I didn't make that noise," said Harry firmly. Aunt Petunia's thin, horsey face now appeared beside Uncle Vernon's wide purple one. She looked livid. "Why were you looking outside of our window?" Yes, good point, Petunia. What were you doing under our window, boy?" "Listening to the news," said Harry in a resigned voice. His aunt and uncle exchanged a look of outrage. "Listening to the news? Again? Well, it changes every day, you see," said Harry. "Don't you be clever with me, boy. I want to know what you're really up to, and don't give me any more of this listening to the news tosh. You know very well that your lot—" "Careful, Vernon," breathed Aunt Petunia, and Uncle Vernon lowered his voice so that Harry could barely hear him. "That your lot don't get our news." That's all you know," said Harry. The Dursleys goggled at him for a few seconds. Then Aunt Petunia said, "You're a nasty little liar. What are all those—" She too lowered her voice so that Harry had to lip read the next word. "Owls doing, if they're not bringing you news." "Aha!" said Uncle Vernon in a triumphant whisper. Get out of that one, boy. As if we didn't know you get all your news from those pestilent birds." Harry hesitated for a moment. It cost him something to tell the truth this one, even though his aunt and uncle could not possibly know how bad Harry felt at admitting it. "The owls aren't bringing me news," said Harry tonelessly. "I don't believe it," said Aunt Petunia at once. "No more than I do," said Uncle Vernon forcefully. "We know you're up to something funny," said Aunt Petunia. "We're not stupid, you know," said Uncle Vernon. "Well, that's news to me," said Harry, his temper rising. And before the Dursleys could call him back, he had wheeled about, crossing the front lawn, stepped over the low garden wall, and was striding off up the street. He was in trouble now, and he knew it. He would have to face his aunt and uncle later, and pay the price for his rudeness, but he did not care very much just at the moment. He had much more pressing matters on his mind. Harry was sure that the cracking noise had been made by someone apparating or disapparating. It was exactly the sound Dobby the house elf made when he vanished into thin air. Was it possible that Dobby was here on Privet Drive? Could Dobby be following him right now, at this very moment? As this thought occurred to him, he wheeled around and stared back down Privet Drive. But it appeared to be completely deserted again, and Harry was sure that Dobby did not know how to become invisible. He walked on, hardly aware of the route he was taking, for he had pounded these streets so often lately that his feet carried him to his favourite haunts automatically. Every few steps he glanced back over his shoulder. Someone magical had been near him as he lay among Aunt Petunia's dying begonias. He was sure of it. Why hadn't they spoken to him? Why hadn't they made contact? Why were they hiding now? And then, as his feeling of frustration peaked, his certainty leaked away. Perhaps it hadn't been magical sound at all. Perhaps he was so desperate for the teeniest sound of contact from the world to which he belonged that he was simply overreacting to perfectly ordinary noises. Could he be sure that it hadn't been the sound of something breaking inside of a neighbor's house? Harry felt a dull, sinking sensation in his stomach, and before he knew it, the feeling of hopelessness that had plagued him all summer rolled over him once again. Tomorrow morning he would be awoken by the alarm at 5 o'clock, so that he could pay the owl that had delivered the daily news. But was there any point in continuing to take it? Harry merely glanced at the front page before throwing it aside these days. When the idiots who ran the paper finally realized that Voldemort was back, it would be headline news, and that was the only kind Harry cared about. If he was lucky, there would also be owls carrying letters from his best friends Ron and Hermione, though any expectation he had had that the letters would bring him news had long ago been dashed. We can't say much about you-know-who, obviously. We've been told not to say anything that in case the letters go astray. We're quite busy, but I can't give you details here. There's a fair amount going on. We'll tell you everything when you see you. But when were they going to see him? Nobody seemed too bothered with the precise date. Hermione had scribbled, "I expect we'll be seeing you quite soon," inside his birthday card. But how soon was soon? As far as Harry could tell from the vague hints in the letters, Hermione and Ron were in the same place, presumably at Ron's parents' house. He could hardly bear to think of the pair of them having fun at the Burrow while he was stuck in Privet Drive. In fact, he was so angry at them that he had thrown both the birthday presents of Honeyduke's chocolates away unopened. Though he regretted this after eating the wilted salad Aunt Petunia had provided for dinner that night. And what were Ron and Hermione busy with? Why wasn't Harry, busy? Hadn't he proved himself capable of handling much more than they? Had they forgotten all that he had done? Hadn't it been he who had entered the graveyard and watched Cedric being murdered and then tied to that tombstone and nearly killed? Wait. I thought Cedric died. Cedric died, did he not? Hadn't it been he who had entered that graveyard and watched Cedric being murdered? Oh, okay, so he's saying that Harry himself had almost been killed. Okay. Don't think about that, Harry told himself sternly for the 100th time that summer. It was bad enough that he kept revisiting the graveyard in his nightmares, without dwelling on it in his waking moments too. He turned a corner into Magnolia Crescent. Halfway along, he passed a narrow alleyway down the side of a garage where he had first clapped his eyes on his godfather. Clapped his eyes. Where he had first clapped eyes on his godfather, Sirius. Sirius at least seemed to understand how Harry was feeling. Admittedly, his letters were just as empty of proper news as Ron and Hermione's, but at least they contained words of caution and consolation instead of tantalizing hints. I know this must be frustrating for you. Keep your nose clean and everything will be okay. Be careful and don't do anything rash. Well, thought Harry, as he crossed Magnolia Crescent, turned into Magnolia Road, and headed toward the darkening play park. He had, by and large, done as Sirius advised. He had at least revisited the temptation to tie his trunk to his broomstick and set off for the Burrow by himself. In fact, Harry thought his behavior had been very good, considering how frustrated and angry he felt at being stuck in Privet Drive this long. Reduced to hiding in flower beds in the hope of hearing something that might point to what Lord Voldemort was doing. Nevertheless, it was quite galling to be told not to be rash by a man who had served 12 years in the wizard prison. Azkaban. Escaped. Attempted to murder... Hold on, what? Let me read that again. Nevertheless, it was quite galling to be told not to be rash by a man who had served 12 years in the wizard prison Azkaban. Escaped. Attempted to commit the murder he had been convicted for in the first place, then gone on the run with a stolen hippogriff. Harry vaulted over the locked park gate and set off across the park's grass. The park was as empty as the surrounding streets. When he reached the swings, he sat onto the only one that Dudley and his friends had not yet managed to break, coiled one arm around the chain, and stared moodily at the ground. He would not be able to hide in the dustless flower bed again tomorrow. Tomorrow he would have to think of some fresh new way of listening to the news. They didn't have cell phones, I imagine. This came out, 2006? I know the first movie came out 2001, which is the year I was born. So I imagine this book probably came out, I don't even know. It came out July 23rd, 2003. Oh my god. This is the 5th book in the installment. It came out when I was only 2 years old. That's fucking insane, mate. I'm sorry, let me continue. In the meantime, he had nothing to look forward to but another restless, disturbed night. Because even when he escaped nightmares about Cedric, he had unsettling dreams about long, dark corridors, all finishing in dead ends and locked doors, which he supposed had something to do with the trapped feeling he had when he was awake. Often the old scar on his forehead prickled uncomfortably, but he did not fool himself that Ron or Hermione or Sirius would find that very interesting anymore. In the past, his scar herding had warned that Voldemort was getting stronger again, but now that Voldemort was back, they would probably remind him that its regular irritation was only to be expected. Nothing to worry about. Old news. The injustice of it all welled up inside of him, so that he wanted to yell with fury. If it hadn't been for him, nobody would even know that Voldemort was back, and his reward was to be stuck in Little Winning for 4 solid weeks, completely cut off from the magical world, reduced to squatting among dying begonias, so that he could hear about water-skiing Boogadars. How could Dumbledore have forgotten him so easily? Why had Ron and Hermione got together without inviting him along too? That's because they're fucking. How much longer was he supposed to endure Sirius telling him to sit tight and be a good boy, or resist the temptation to write to the stupid Daily Prophet and point out that Voldemort had returned? These various thoughts whirled around in Harry's head, and his insides dry with anger. As a sultry, velvety night fell around him, the air full of the smell of warm, dry grass, and the only sound that of a low grumble of traffic on the road beyond the park railings. He did not know how long he had sat on the swing before the sound of voices interrupted musings, and he looked up. The street lamp from the surrounding roads was casting a misty glow strong enough to silhouette a group of people making their way across the park. One of them was singing loudly, a loud, crude song. The others were laughing. A soft tickling noise came from several expensive racing bikes that they were wheeling along. Harry knew who those people were. The figure in front was unmistakably his cousin, Dudley Dursley, wending his way home, accompanied by his faithful gang. Dudley was as vast as ever, but a year's hard dieting and the discovery of a new talent had wrought quite a change in his physique. As Uncle Vernon delightedly told anyone who would listen, Dudley had recently become the junior heavyweight inter-school boxing champion of the Southeast. The noble sport, as Uncle Vernon had called it, had made Dudley even more formidable than he had seemed to Harry in the primary school days, when he had served as Dudley's first punching bag. Harry was not remotely afraid of his cousin anymore, but he still didn't think that Dudley had learned that punching him harder and more accurately was cause for a celebration. Neighborhood children all around were terrified of him, even more terrified than they were of that Potter boy, who they had been warned was a hardened hooligan who attended St. Brutus's secure center for incurably criminal boys. Harry watched the dark figures cross the grass and wondered whom they had been beating up tonight. I love when authors use the word whom. Like, I'm interrupting this interaction, but like a lot of authors don't use the word whom. Like during when I was working on or like just people in general. Like I was at a game store yesterday trying to pick up a new headset, and this lady was like, "So for whom are you buying this?" And I'm like, "Ma'am, with respect, can I marry you?" And I didn't actually say that aloud. That would have been weird. And I'm not as outgoing as I am reading these fucking books. But I fucking love when people know how to use proper grammar. Alright, let me continue this. Harry watched the dark figures crossing the grass and wondered whom they had been beating up tonight. Look round, Harry found himself thinking as he watched them. Come on, look round. I'm sitting here all alone. Come and have a go. If Dudley's friends saw him sitting there, they would be sure to make a beeline for him. And what would Dudley do then? He wouldn't want to lose face in front of the gang, but he'd be terrified of provoking Harry. It would be really funny to watch Dudley's dilemma, to taunt him, watch him, with him powerless to respond. And if any of the others tried hitting Harry, Harry was ready. He had his wand. Let them try. He'd love to vent some of his frustrations on the boys who had once made his life hell. But they did not turn round. They did not see him. They were almost at the railings. Harry mastered the impulse to call after them. Seeking a fight was not a smart move. He must not use magic. He would be risking expulsion again. Dudley's gang's voice died. They were out of sight, heading along Magnolia Road. There you go, Sirius, Harry thought dully. Nothing rash. Keeping my nose clean. Exactly the opposite of what you'd have done. He got to his feet and stretched. Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon seemed to feel that whenever Dudley turned up was the right time to be home, and any time after that was much too late. Uncle Vernon had threatened to lock Harry in the shed if he came home after Dudley again, so, stifling a yawn, still scowling, Harry set off toward the park gate. Magnolia Road, like Privet Drive, was full of large square houses with perfectly manicured lawns, all owned by large square owners who drove very clean cars similar to Uncle Vernon's. Harry preferred Little Winging by night, when the curtained windows made patches of jewel-bright colors in the darkness, and he ran no danger of hearing disapproving mutters about his delinquent appearance when he passed the householders. He walked quickly, so that halfway along Magnolia Road, Dudley's gang came into view again. They were saying their farewells at the entrance to Magnolia Crescent. Harry stepped into the shadows of a large lilac tree and waited. Squealed like a pig, didn't he? Malcolm was saying, to goughs from the others. Nice right hook, Big D, said Piers. Same time tomorrow, said Dudley. Round at my place. My parents are out, said Gordon. See you then, said Dudley. Bye, Dud. See you, Big D. Harry waited for the rest of the gang to move on before setting off again. When their voices had faded once more, he headed round the corner to Magnolia Crescent, and by walking very quickly, he soon came within hailing distance of Dudley, who was strolling along at his ease, humming tunelessly. Hey, Big D. Dudley turned. Oh, he grunted. It's you. How long have you been, Big D, then? Said Harry. Shut it, snarled Dudley, turning away again. A cool name, said Harry, grinning and falling in a step behind his cousin, but you'll always be Ickle-Diddlyums for me. I said shut it, said Dudley, whose ham-like hands had curled into fists. Don't the boys know what your moms calls you? Shut your face. You don't tell her to shut her face. What about Pumpkin? And Dinky Diddydums. Can I use them then? Dudley said nothing. The effort of keeping himself from hitting Harry seemed to be demanding all of his self-control. So, who have you been beating up tonight? Harry asked, his grin fading. Another 10-year-old? I know you did Mark Evans 2 nights ago. He was asking for it, snarled Dudley. Oh, yeah? He cheeked me. Yeah. Did you say he looked like a pig that's been taught to ride, that's been taught to walk on all its hind legs? 'Cause that's not cheek, dude. That's true. A muscle was twitching in Dudley's jaw. It gave Harry enormous satisfaction to know how furious he was making Dudley. He felt as though he was siphoning off his own frustrations into his cousin, the only outlet he had. They turned right down the narrow alleyway where Harry had first seen Sirius, and which formed a shortcut between Magnolia Crescent and Wisteria Walk. It was empty and much darker than the streets it linked because there were no street lamps. Their footsteps were muffled between garage walls on one side and a high fence on the other. Think you're a big man carrying that thing, do you? Dudley asked after a few seconds. What thing? That thing you're hiding. Harry grinned again. Not as stupid as you look, are you, Dud? But I suppose if you were, you wouldn't be able to walk and talk at the same time. Harry pulled out his wand. He saw Dudley look sideways at it. You're not allowed, Dudley said at once. I know you're not. You'll get expelled from that freak school you go to. How do you know they haven't changed the rules, Big D? They haven't, said Dudley, though he didn't sound completely convinced. Harry laughed softly. You haven't got the guts to take me on without that thing, have you? Dudley snarled. Whereas you just need 4 mates behind you before you can beat up a 10-year-old. You know that boxing title you keep banging on about? How old was your opponent? 7? 8? He was 16 for your information, snarled Dudley. And he was out cold for 20 minutes after I finished with him, and he was twice as heavy as you. You just wait until I tell Dad you had that thing out. Running to Daddy, are you now? And is equal boxing champ frightened of nasty Harry's wand? Not this brave at night, are you? This is night, Diddykins. That's what we call it when it goes all dark like this. I mean, when you're in bed, Dudley snarled. He had stopped walking. Harry stopped too, staring at his cousin. From the little he could see of Dudley's large face, he was wearing a strangely triumphant look. What do you mean I'm not brave in bed? Said Harry, completely nonplussed. What, am I supposed to be frightened to pillows or something? I heard you last night, said Dudley breathlessly, talking in your sleep, moaning. What do you mean? Harry said again, but there was a cold, plunging sensation in his stomach. He had revisited the graveyard last night in his dreams. Dudley gave a harsh bark of laughter, then adopted a high-pitched, whimpering voice. Don't kill Cedric. Don't call Cedric. Who's Cedric? Your boyfriend? You're lying, said Harry automatically. But his mouth had gone dry. He knew Dudley wasn't lying. How else would he know about Cedric? Dad, help me. Dad, he's gonna kill me. Dad, boo-hoo. Shut up, said Harry quietly. Shut up, Dudley, I'm warning you. Come and help me, Dad. Mom, come and help me. He's killed Cedric. Dad, help me. He's going to... Don't you point that thing at me. Dudley backed into the alley wall. Harry was pointing his wand directly at Dudley's heart. He could feel 14 years of hatred of Dudley pounding in his veins. What wouldn't he give to strike now, to drink Dudley so thoroughly he'd have to crawl home like an insect, struck dumb, sprouting feelers. Don't ever talk about that again, Harry snarled. Do you understand me? Point that thing elsewhere. I said, do you understand me? Point it somewhere else. Do you understand me? Get that thing away from... Dudley gave an odd, shuddering gasp, as though he'd been doused in ice water. Something had happened to the night. The star-strewn indigo sky was suddenly pitch black and lightless. The stars, the moon, the misty street lamps on either side of the alley had vanished. The distant grumble of cars and the whisper of trees had gone. The balmy evening was suddenly piercingly, bitingly cold. They were surrounded by total, impenetrable, silent darkness, as though some giant hand had dropped a thick, icy mantle over the entire alleyway, blinding them. For a split second, Harry thought he had done magic without meaning to, despite the fact that he'd been resisting as hard as he could. Then his reason caught up with his senses. He didn't have the power to turn off the stars. He turned his head this way and that, trying to see something, but the darkness pressed on his eyes like a weightless veil. Dudley's terrified voice broke in Harry's ear. What are you doing? Stop it. I'm not doing anything. Shut up and don't move. I can't see. I've gone blind. I said shut up. Harry stood stock still, turning his sightless eyes left and right. The cold was so intense that he was shivering all over. Goosebumps had erupted on his arms, and the hairs on the back of his neck were standing up. He opened his eyes to the fullest extent, staring blankly around, unseeing. It was impossible. They couldn't be here. Not in Little Wingham. He strained his ears. He would hear them before he saw them. I'll tell Dad, Dudley whimpered. Where are you? What do you do? Will you shut up? Harry hissed. I'm trying to listen. But he fell silent. He had heard just the thing he had been dreading. There was something in the alleyway apart from themselves. Something that was drawing low, hoarse, rattling breaths. Harry felt a horrible jolt of dread as he stood trembling in the freezing air. Cut it out! Stop it! I'll hit you! I swear I will! Dudley, shut! Wham! A fist made contact with the side of Harry's head, lifting Harry off his feet. Small white lights popped in front of Harry's eyes. For the second time in an hour, he felt as though his head had been cleaved in two. Next moment, he had landed hard on the ground, and his wand had flown out of his hand. You moron, Dudley! Harry yelled, his eyes watering with pain, as he scrambled to his hands and knees, now feeling around frantically in the blackness. He heard Dudley bumbling away, hitting the alley fence, stumbling. Dudley, come back, you're running right at it. There was a horrible squealing yell, and Dudley's footsteps stopped. At the same time, Harry felt a creeping chill behind him that could only mean one thing. There was more than one. Dudley, keep your mouth shut. Whatever you do, keep your mouth shut. Won't! Harry muttered frantically, his hands flying all over the ground like spiders. Where's Won't? Come on, Lumos! He said the spell automatically, desperate for light to help him in his search. And to his disbelieving relief, light flared inches from his right hand. The wand tip had ignited. Harry snatched it up, scrambling to his feet, and turned around. His stomach turned over. A towering hooded figure was gliding smoothly toward him, hovering over the ground, no feet or face visible beneath its robes, sucking on the night as it came. Scrambling backward, Harry raised his wand. Expecto Patronum! A silvery wisp of vapour shot from the tip of the wand, and the Dementor slowed, but the spell hadn't worked properly. Tipping over his feet, Harry retreated farther, as the Dementor bore down upon him, panic fogging his brain. Concentrate. A pair of grey, slimy, scabbed hands slid from inside the Dementor's robes, reaching for him. A rushing noise filled Harry's ears. Expecto Patronum! His voice sounded dim and distant. Another wisp of silver smoke, feebler than the last, drifted from the wand. He couldn't do it any more. He couldn't work the spell. There was laughter inside his own head, shrill, high-pitched laughter. He could smell the Dementor's putrid, death-cold breath, filling his own lungs, drowning him. Think, something happy. But there was no happiness in him. The Dementor's icy fingers were closing on his throat. The high-pitched laughter was growing louder and louder, and a voice spoke inside of his head. Bow to death, Harry. You might even be painless. I would not know. I have never died. He was never going to see Ron and Hermione again. And their faces burst clearly into his mind as he fought for breath. Expecto Patronum! An enormous silver stag erupted from the tip of Harry's wand. Its antlers cut the Dementor in place, where the heart should have been, and it was thrown backwards, weightless as darkness. And as the stag charged, the Dementor swooped away, bat-like and defeated. "This way," Harry shouted at the stag. Wheeling around, he sprinted down the alleyway, holding the lit wand aloft. "Dudley! Dudley!" He had run barely a dozen steps when he reached them. Dudley was curled on the ground, his arms clamped over his face. A second Dementor crouched low over him, gripping his wrists in its slimy hands, prizing them slowly, almost lovingly apart, lowering its hooded head towards Dudley's face, as though he was about to kiss him. "Get it!" Harry bellowed, and with a rushing, roaring sound, the silver stag he had conjured came galloping past him. The Dementor's eyeless face was barely an inch from Dudley's when the silver antlers caught it. The thing was thrown up in the air, and like its fellow, it soared away and was absorbed into the darkness. The stag cantered to the end of the alleyway and dissolved into silver mist. Okay, sorry to interrupt, but Harry said that the Dementor was about to kiss Dudley. Now I know, like in the movies and shit, the Dementor's kiss was like literally just sucking at their soul and having cool images and shit for it. But in this, it seems like the Dementors are just gay. Like they're going around actually kissing people and taking their souls. Like, I've had a couple of exes like that. Maybe they were all Dementors. But sorry, I didn't know that they like actually went around kissing people to take their soul. That's just extremely funny to me for some reason. Okay. Anyways, moon, stars, and street lamps burst back into life. A warm breeze swept the alleyway. Trees rustled in neighboring gardens, and the mundane rumble of cars in Magnolia Crescent filled the air again. Harry stood quite still, all his senses vibrating, taking in the abrupt return to normalcy. After a moment, he became aware that his t-shirt was sticking to him. He was drenched in sweat. He could not believe what had just happened. Dementors here, in Little Wingy. I don't know how to say that word. Little Wingin? Is it Little Wingham? Little Wingy. I don't know. Dudley lay curled up on the ground, whimpering and shaking. Harry bent down to see whether he was in a fit state to stand up, but then he heard loud, running footsteps behind him. Instinctively raising his wand again, he spun on his heel to face the newcomer. Mrs. Figg, the batty old neighbour, came panting into sight. Her grizzled grey hair was escaping from its hairnet. A clanking string shopping bag was swinging from her wrist. Her feet were halfway out of her tartan carpet slippers. Harry managed to stow his wand hurriedly out of sight, but "Don't put it away, idiot boy," she shrieked. "What if there are more of them around? Oh, I'm going to kill Mundungus Fletcher." Damn it. Can't even turn the page. Oh, so that's the end of the chapter. Okay. So chapter 2 is A Peck of Owls. I will not read it in this video. We've already been reading for a while, and it's a kind of a long ass chapter. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I understand, it makes sense. It's fucking Harry Potter. The movies are like 2.5 hours long. But anyways, like and subscribe if you like the video, and even if you don't, I don't care. I really don't. But in all honesty, I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be reading a lot of vast different types of books. A majority of them are going to be fiction, but if you haven't heard any of my other books, whatever. Anyways, this is my favorite book out of all of them. Just because I love the villain. I'm a sucker for good villains. That fucking pink witch should die, and I really hate that she doesn't die until like the very end. Spoilers. But yeah, so, and I'm kind of rambling. I do that pretty much every video I make. I'm still brand new to this. Literally started like 5 days ago. But anyways, I hope you all enjoyed, and if you don't, I don't care. Again. Sorry if there was some background noise. I do own a dog and he's kind of noisy sometimes. But, anyways, that was Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 1 by J.K. Rowling, which I'm sure everybody fucking knows it, even if people don't even, read Harry Potter. They already know who J.K. Rowling is because of all the bullshit. But, anyways, I hope you all have a great day. I'll be revisiting all the books that I have on my queue right now. Pretty much every day I'm trying to, do a chapter a day at least. So, yeah, this might be a long series. And so you probably noticed this already, but each of my videos will have a different title screen, like a different cover image. So for Harry Potter, we have some, magical cartons, or whatever, like story cartons or whatever, like wizard shit. And so like all of my Harry Potter commentaries are gonna be like that, and the same with the other types of books. They're gonna have their own cover image, so you can differentiate between the different types of books. Anyways, again, have a great day. Thank you for tuning in. If you made it this far into the video, thank you for listening. I know it's hard to listen to my annoying ass voice, but anyways, I'll see you all later. See you tomorrow.